Good morning to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather outlook for Tuesday, July 9th, 2024. Kind of forgot what day it was for a moment, but we're now here on Tuesday of July 9th. We're now post barrel, and we have quite a bit to talk about today, especially when it comes to the future of hurricane season after barrel. We're going to go over what models are showing, but most importantly, what forecasts are now showing now that we have barrel done with, and we're looking ahead into what could potentially be, and what I think at this point now, especially after barrel, is very likely to be a very active hurricane season from this point on out. Let's start off though with Beryl from the National Hurricane Center. It has officially become a post-tropical system now. It is no longer tropical. It is 30 miles per hour, and its minimum central pressure is 1,004 millibars. After coming ashore in Texas yesterday morning, wreaking havoc and also causing quite a tornado outbreak associated with the storm as well. Thankfully, Beryl is gone now, and it'll probably be on its way out of here over the next day or so completely, and it'll definitely be on its way out of here by next spring, in which I'm pretty sure, especially after all the damage and destruction is caused from the Caribbean, even into Texas now. Looking at the damage pictures from places like Houston and all the flooding that's occurring in Texas now, and the tornado outbreak that occurred. And obviously, we can't forget about the catastrophic damage that was inflicted on the Windward Islands by Beryl 2. I'm pretty sure by next spring, it is safe to say at this point, Beryl will probably be one of our probably many retired names from this hurricane season, but it is post-tropical nonetheless. Really quickly, a satellite image of Beryl you could see no longer has any tropical characteristics anymore. It's just this broad mid-latitude system now that's over the U.S. Still going to bring heavy rain, though, to portions of the Midwest, and we'll probably see impacts there, but it's no longer a tropical system, and it is finally clearing out. And as you can see by the rest of the look of the Atlantic, there's really nothing much else to write home about in terms of anything expected over the next several days in the very least. But that now shifts our attention to what is the future of hurricane season after Beryl, and one way we could look at that is our predictions. Philip Klotzbach from Colorado State University just came out with a prediction today, literally moments ago actually, and he is now saying this year is very likely to be an extremely active hurricane season. And this is the tweet that he posted in the typical, predictions. Philip Klotzbach with Colorado State University now predicts 25 named storms, so that is well above the average of 14 that we typically have in a normal hurricane season. Hurricanes, 12 hurricanes he expects, and major hurricanes he expects, or this is it, 6 major hurricanes. Basically, almost all of these are at least double or near double the amount of what is typical in a regular hurricane season. And what I find really interesting is the accumulated cyclone energy value is at 230 points, and this measures the amount of energy being output by the winds that a tropical cyclone produces. 230, that is near record levels. We're already at record high amount of ACE for hurricane season at this point in the season, especially from Beryl alone. We're now at 230. And what I find really, really interesting as well is the amount of ACE he expects. Philip Klotzbach expects past 60 west, so west of 60 west. So that is in the Western Atlantic, where we are. He expects 140 ACE points. So that probably means Philip Klotzbach is picking up on potentially lots of activity in the Western Atlantic as well, which will add to the ACE, and that probably means more major hurricanes later on in the season. And he has a full document that actually goes over the predictions Philip Klotzbach has, and I actually wanted to really quickly pinpoint what his analogues are, and this is the really interesting thing I found from Philip Klotzbach's predictions. Quite a bit of analogues that he used this season, but the ones that really stand out to me and the ones that I think really cement his prediction into this year being super active. He points out 2020, 2005, 1995, and 1933 as some of the top analog years for this year. I mean, it makes sense now given that we have Barrow, but once you average those all together, we obviously know 2005 and 2020, most active hurricane seasons in recent history, with named storms, and especially in the case of 2005 ACE as well. But the other year that I really find interesting that Klotzbach uses is 1933. And as I mentioned before, and a lot of people have especially been mentioning over the last several weeks now, basically since Beryl happened, 1933 was the last time we got a hurricane in the MDR in late June, and that year ended up having record amount of ACE for a hurricane season ever. It actually has 250, almost 260 ACE points, and that is now one of the top analog years by Colorado State for this year. So it makes sense why they're going with an aggressive forecast like 230 ACE points. And it wouldn't even shock me at this point, as if we continue with the pace that we have right now. It wouldn't shock me even if we have even more than just 230 at this point. This year is really looking like it could be a very historic year, and all the signs are there. As I said, it's already pointing that way, especially given the amount of activity we've seen so far. And that's what I want to point out right now. These statistics we've had so far in the Atlantic. Typically, we already have 3 named storms right now, and this is also by Colorado State University. And what's neat about this, it actually breaks down every basin in the world and what their activity is supposed to be. And this just goes to show how active this season has already been so far. In the Atlantic, we already have 3 named storms. We already had up to Chris. Obviously, we had Alberto up to Chris. That's 3 named storms so far. The average we typically see is only close to 2. So we're above normal in named storms, although we're not crazy like 2020. 2020, we already had, I think, Faye or Edouard or Faye by now, the F storm or whatever. That's 6 named storms already. So we're definitely not in 2020 level yet with that, although especially if activity continues, maybe we could get to 2020 levels of activity pretty soon, but we'll have to see activity start to catch up. But the interesting part that I really find is the named storm days, and this goes to show the quality of this season so far, and that's something a lot of people like to point out, is the quality of a hurricane season. And this goes to just really show the quality aspect of this season so far, which has a lot to do with the ACE. The named storm days so far, 11, almost 12 full named storm days that we've had so far in the Atlantic. We typically only get 4 or close to 4 this time of year, and we're already almost at 12. So 3 times the average at this point through July 9th. In a normal hurricane season, the amount of hurricanes, only 1. We typically don't get our first hurricane yet at this point, so already above normal in that. But once again, the amount of hurricane days, just incredible. 6.25, so 6.25 hurricane days, and we don't even have a full, on average, we typically don't even have a full hurricane day yet. And what I think is probably the most astounding, already our first major hurricane. We've not had a major hurricane in July or before August 1st, because technically Beryl became a major hurricane first on June 30th. We typically don't have that till late August, and we've also not had our first major hurricane since before August in many, many years. I think in 2008 was the last time we had a major hurricane before August, so that's already above. But I think the most astounding part of all, in terms of all of these statistics, is the accumulated cyclone energy. And I guess this really helps feed back to the idea of us getting potentially near record levels of ACE this season. At 230 is the amount of ACE we've already had so far, which is already extremely record breaking, and that is 36 points in the ACE already. And the average for this time of year, get this, only 4 points. Typically only 4 points we have on average in terms of accumulated cyclone energy through July 9th. And we are like, what, 6, 7 times that amount? Even 8 times that amount? Or even nine, I think. Yeah, actually 9 times that amount, because 4 times 9 is 36. We're like 9 times the amount of, on average, that we get in terms of accumulated cyclone energy. And that just speaks to the volume of the kind of activity we've had this hurricane season. So it definitely is not realistic to see, unrealistic, I should say, to see when people like Philip Klotzbach come out with a prediction now, explicitly saying, and they also mentioned Beryl kind of factoring into the fact that we've had such, such high activity so far, and that's probably a harbinger that we're going to have more activity, that is extreme for the season to come. It just speaks to what we've had so far, and it definitely makes it seem understandable why we would have Philip Klotzbach come out with a prediction with 25 named storms, 6 major hurricanes, and ACE of 230, and that is really incredible that's the amount of ACE that they're predicting, given that that's easily in the top 5 in terms of most accumulated cyclone energy in a hurricane season. But it honestly seems realistic now, especially given what we've had, with Beryl and the activity we've had so far. And also, environmentally too, Beryl had to have happened from the extremely favorable environment it had, and it's very easy to pick that out, especially when you look at something like the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic. And we've talked about this since the beginning of the year, that the Atlantic is just at incredibly warm levels. And now we're seeing that incredibly warm levels of heat in the ocean leads to sometimes, not always, and we've seen instances where it doesn't always happen, but especially when times are right, they can lead to incredible storms, especially for the time of year it is, which is July. And you can see even to now, we still have very warm sea surface temperature anomalies across the Atlantic, even through the Caribbean too. And the very crazy part that I want to show you is, let's actually look at, just for a comparison of how sea surface temperature anomalies look like, on the day that Beryl formed, so June 28th. And the crazy part is that this is how sea surface temperature anomalies look like, very warm in the MDR and especially in the Caribbean. And let's compare that to how it is now. MDR obviously cooled off a little bit. It's really warm in the MDR still, nonetheless, though, at least 1 degree Celsius, and also areas as well solidly above 2 Celsius as well. But especially in the Caribbean, it's just astounding. We go from this in the Caribbean before Beryl to now after Beryl, barely cooled down enough, and this is still probably near record levels in terms of warmth that we have in the Caribbean to this day. And it just goes to show just how much energy there is, in the Atlantic this year, which will probably fuel a really historic hurricane season ahead after Beryl. And the Gulf of Mexico, yeah, the Gulf of Mexico cooled down a little bit. There was definitely an influence from Beryl, but I'm going to tell you right now, even then, it's barely cooled off compared to how much hurricanes can take out in terms of energy. And that also speaks to the amount of energy in the Gulf, just across the entire Atlantic, honestly, not just the Caribbean or Gulf or the MDR. It's just the entire Atlantic is incredibly warm this year. And actually, even the Northern Gulf warmed up quite a bit. But this part here that you see right now through the Central Gulf, obviously it came from Beryl. You could definitely see, if we go back to the day Beryl formed to now, definitely some energy taken out. But it is still only the beginning of summer. We still have the rest of summer to go. The MDR is probably going to continue to warm. We'll probably go back to near record levels soon, I would imagine. Wouldn't shock me. And the Gulf of Mexico, especially this time of year, trust me, in the Gulf of Mexico, it warms up in a snap of a finger this time of year. During the summer, it cools down one day, and then within a week, it's back to record warm levels, especially in a year like this. Just to tell you right now. Nonetheless, even the Gulf of Mexico is still very warm and is still enough so to sustain a major hurricane in the Gulf, but this will probably warm back up in a heartbeat, and the Gulf of Mexico will probably be able to sustain another hurricane or something of that extent, as we get towards the peak as well. So in general, the Atlantic is just very primed this year, and I think Beryl has proven that to us. But just to add on top of that is the fact that we don't have El Nino too. I mean, last year was really, really warm in the Atlantic, but we had a strong, very strong El Nino last year, and that still resulted us in having a super active hurricane season. Now that we have that warmth that's somewhat there, obviously it's especially not as much as last year because last year was really warm in the Eastern Atlantic. And actually, maybe I should do a comparison to last year and these other years like we did sometimes in the past. We did this before. We would sometimes take the sea surface temperature anomaly graph from this year and then take it from other years and compare and contrast. Maybe I'll do that in a few days from now. But the bottom line is that there's no El Nino, and that goes to the other point, is that we're also going to have La Nina. Philip Klotzbach also stated this in their forecast, is looking very much likely that La Nina will be with us at some point, if not at least neutral conditions as we get towards the peak. But it doesn't matter because there's just not going to be an El Nino no matter what. Just to really quickly show the CFS forecast for the Nino 3.4. And you could see very much consensus that will be in La Nina conditions. If not, at least cool neutral conditions. There's barely any models that take this to El Nino at all. In fact, if they do, it's towards the end of the season, towards the end of the year. But I won't even buy these models. Look at where the consensus is, and that's really into La Nina territory or cool neutral in the very least. And we know that La Nina and neutral, anything that's not an El Nino, especially in the Atlantic, because there's also been years where we didn't have either El Nino or La Nina, we were just a neutral, and sometimes some of those hurricane seasons are actually the most active and also tend to be the most impactful as well. And just combine all these factors together, and it looks like from here on out, we're probably in for a rocky road that'll only get worse. Worse before it gets better, because we're going to get worse, but then the end of the hurricane season is going to come, and eventually it'll all calm down, and hopefully by then we'll have had to take out all this energy, because all this energy in the ocean, it needs to go somewhere, and hurricanes are, part of the balancing nature when it comes to energy in the ocean. And I mean, that's their main fuel, is all this heat in the Atlantic that stretches for thousands of miles, and it needs to go somewhere, and that's definitely going to go into the rest of the hurricane season, which will probably be really active from here on out. But how does it look like, at least within the next week? How does it look like, especially for those in the islands and places all across the Atlantic right now? Yucatan, Texas, people that are trying to recover from Beryl. How does it look over the next week? Are we monitoring anything of potential interest? And let's take a look at the GFS going out towards the next week. You can see the energy of Beryl moves into the Midwest and then into the Northeast, and then kind of just gets submerged in whatever mid-latitude energy that there is, and then Beryl is out of here, and then we're already at 5 days. Nothing really happens. The trades once again remain very strong through the Caribbean, so we start seeing a little bit more of climatology come into play. And then as we get towards the next week, nothing really happens in the Atlantic. Everything is quiet. We're all good. But really interesting of note, there is stuff that tries to get going in the Pacific. So we might have some Pacific activity to watch over the next several days. I mean, they're basically still waiting on activity to occur. We had, I think, a depression in the Pacific several days ago. Actually, we had our first named storm, Tropical Storm Aletta, in the Pacific. So that already happened, but they're still very behind. But they'll probably, I'd imagine, over the next several weeks, begin to catch up, especially now that the Atlantic won't do much for now. But let's extend that frame a little bit, and let's use that with the velocity potential, just to kind of get an idea. Once again, velocity potential, the areas of where we're looking at potential favorability in the atmosphere globally. So it has to do with the MJO. I do find it very interesting over the next several days. Looks like we'll have not much going on in the Atlantic. First off, I should mention all this orange here, which is where we are at right now. So you can see orange. That represents sinking air. not very favorable atmospherically, and you see where that is. It's over the Atlantic right now, and that's going to last for the next several days. But then as we actually get closer towards mid-month, we kind of see this small pocket of green. I think that's a Kelvin wave, a convectively coupled Kelvin wave. Kind of like the MJO, but just think of it as a small pocket of fertilizer that comes through. And it looks like, at least from the European forecasts, they kind of hint that happens towards mid-month. And then also on the other hand, we see MJO, or all this rising air, begin to set up in the Indian Ocean and near Africa, which we all know, the African standing wave that really tends to help set up these tropical waves in the Atlantic. So maybe, and that happens especially towards the mid to the latter half of the month of July. So maybe we'll have maybe the next week or so of where nothing happens. But it looks like I think we might have to start watching again in the Atlantic come late July, probably the last week and a half, 2 weeks of July. Where we might see more activity again, and we'll see. Is it just regular, regular activity that we would expect for July, or is something else crazy going to happen? And that'll probably add on even more to a very active hurricane season. We'll have to see, but at least for the next week, things look calm. But enjoy it while it lasts, especially after with Beryl. Definitely enjoy the next week or so of quiet, because I'm telling you, in a few weeks from now, we're probably going to start getting a whole bunch of more Beryl-like storms throughout the Atlantic, and they'll probably happen a lot more often and a lot closer together, especially given that we'll be at peak. And it's only going to be an uphill battle from here. That's what it's looking like, and it looks very much likely that this year will probably end on a historic note. It just seems that way this year, and I guess the best thing we could do now is to prepare for it, if you haven't already, especially after what Beryl did, and hope for the best, and just watch the tropics. That's all we could do from now till the rest of the hurricane season. With that being said, though, I'm going to end it off for today. If you like what you saw today, I would really encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, share with family and friends as well. If you're new to my channel, subscribe, especially get notifications as well for my videos whenever I upload them. I'm really going to try to upload now every single day till the end of the hurricane season. And that's what we're going to do every single day on the uphill battle till it gets better. With that being said, stay safe, peace, love, and kindness to you all, and we will talk again tomorrow. Bye.